coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Biden was asked the other day about this question of rising prices before these numbers dropped. And his response is just to basically say, at least the sub rosa or implication is, what's wrong with you people? We have the greatest economy we've had in a long time, job growth, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't you just shut up about this? Meanwhile, as you indicated, Spencer, normal people every week, realize that it's really hard to get out of the grocery store for less than $100. And that's when you buy 7 items, let alone a whole week's worth of stuff. So for those that wish Biden to be defeated, we certainly all count ourselves in that camp, this seems like a positive development. Although we should say that it's not positive in general because our fellow Americans continue to hurt.
And as James pointed out, there has been job growth and unemployment is low, but most of the job growth has been among non-voters, like non-citizens. That's who's taken all these jobs. So, in fact, the foreigners are taking our gerbs.
Yeah,
it's true.
It do really be it do be like that sometimes.
So it seems.
Come on, guys. Yeah. They're not taking our jobs, and it's good that they are.
Welcome, everyone, once again to the Roundtable, the American Minds Editors and Publishers podcast. I'm your host, sometimes, Ryan Williams. I'll switch off with Seth, and maybe occasionally, for old time's sake, have Spencer come back, but just trying to mix it up here. I'm joined, as always, or most of the time, by Spencer Clavin, Associate Editor of the Claremont Review of Books and Features Editor of the American Mind, or maybe we're calling him Editor at Large now of the American Mind. Seth Barron, Managing Editor of the American Mind, and James Poulos, Editor of the American Mind. I am coming to you live from our new house in Greater Dallas-Fort Worth. We finally made the move. Some friends of the pod knew this was happening eventually. It's finally happened. We're not closing the California office. We're just shrinking it a little bit and setting up a little post here. I'm in Tarrant County, closer to Fort Worth than Dallas. About 5 minutes from Mike Anton. I'll leave the city out of it so we can remain an undisclosed location. But we all went over to the Antons on Monday for the total eclipse of the sun, which was pretty interesting. I think that must be the first totality I've seen from somewhere where I could view it. These happen, every 10, 20 years. So I've seen partials before, but I must say it was pretty impressive. Maybe a minute and a half or so of total. Not darkness, but dusk at daytime, middle of the day. Mike's wife is quite the STEM aficionado, so she had the special covers over the telescope and the binoculars, and so it was pretty impressive. I know Spencer saw a total. What was your impression, Dr. Clavin?
Well, we had the living embodiment of that meme that some people were passing around where you get really excited to watch the total eclipse and then the clouds come in sort of like Leonardo DiCaprio from, I think it's Django Unchained, and say, nope. So we had a lot of cloud cover that kind of got in the way, but all the same, there was a brief moment when the clouds parted, the skies cleared, and I was on a hike with a friend and we had gone to, position ourselves just the right moment and looked at it through these kind of funny glasses that we got from Warby Parker, which I think are basically the standard thing that everybody was using. And as you say, Ryan, there is a kind of just primal awe that sets in, which has been my favorite feature of this entire little scene in our public life. That, of course, eclipses are closely watched by NASA, and you can get all sorts of up to the minute, capital TS, the science data about what's happening. But simultaneously, and in a manner we'll probably discuss further, there is also, like on a parallel track, there is Stone Age level, like awe and wonderment, and in some cases fear about what all this means. It really does. I won't say it comes across as biblical because I have a hot take about that, but it comes across as sort of cosmic in this big way. And I'll say lastly that the one really interesting thing to me that I had not predicted is that the moon doesn't just kind of start on one side of the sun and then gradually like bob its way over to the other side. It kind of wobbles back and forth in front of the sun for a bit because I guess the two orbits aren't, are out competing each other, sort of like two cars on a racetrack. One pulls ahead a little bit, the other pulls ahead, and that was something about that was just, again in a kind of primal caveman sort of way. I was like, ooh, look at that.
James, you were also in Dallas for your side gig, 0 Hour on the Blaze. So you got to see the Totality. If anyone hasn't checked out 0 Hour, you should. Mike Rowe, recent guest, among other notables. Any thoughts?
As the once upon a time former editor at large of the American Mind, I have to say that I'm delighted to see this august and noble title passed on. And as the host of 0 Hour, I will note that perhaps not yet all of your favorite Claremont personalities, but many and more to come can be found scattered across various episodes of the show, which is a deep dive into all the topics that you nerds who enjoy the Roundtable doubtless want to hear even more of in video format. As far as the eclipse goes, it's been fascinating to see the rise of sort of post Enlightenment views of the cosmos asserting themselves more boldly on the internet these days, whether they are sort of pre-modern critiques of space or whether they are sort of medieval Christian interpretations of the heavenly bodies. All very interesting. Of course, I would say that this has all been provoked by the dominance of digital technology over our inner and outer lives. And so there seem to be very few people who just kind of went outside and put the glasses on and said, that's cool, and went back to their business. People are sort of rediscovered the mystery of this world and this universe that we live in. And while it might be tempting to ridicule them for breaking out crackpot theories that seem to belong to the dustbin of history, I'm actually all for people kind of taking a second look and rediscovering the wonder and the mystery of our surroundings that do not exist only on our screens, but are there for us to goggle up at in the heavens. I found it to be quite a show. I'd only seen partial eclipses before. And of course, the next full eclipse, at least in the US, is going to be quite a ways away. So fun times.
Well, having, I guess being the only one on the podcast who was not in the zone of totality, maybe my experience was a little more humdrum, but it was fun in Manhattan. I like it when the light gets kind of diffuse and the shadows have this weird crescent thing to them. People were very friendly. I borrowed people, a lot of people just lingering around during the eclipse. My favorite comment, well, let me just say that, I actually enjoyed, 10, 12 years ago, there was the transit of Venus, where Venus crosses in front of the sun. And we're not going to get that for another, I think, 139 years. And that was kind of interesting. That I kind of found that kind of fascinating to see, this tiny little dot crossing the sun. I'm not saying it's certainly not as spectacular, but another interesting astronomical phenomenon that I enjoyed. I did like it that the signs taken for wonders and all that. Sunny Hostin on The View commented that she said, well, given the earthquake last week and now the eclipse, how can people deny that climate change is real? Something like that. And even Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg, the two, who just seem like they're either some weird combination of Alzheimer's and marijuana, just speaking randomly. They were like, what are you talking about? The earthquake is underground. And Whoopi Goldberg's like, yeah, but the eclipse is predictable hundreds of years in advance. So I thought that was kind of funny. I guess you read into nature what you will.
Well, right. I love the Joy Behar quote because I just like to imagine her with a weird medieval cleric's hat on, sort of like holding up her actuarial tables or whatever. And it does speak to something. This is kind of, I think, what James was getting at. An eclipse is a phenomenon in the most ancient sense of that word, which is this Greek idea of that which appears to us. It's kind of one of the starkest examples of this, that it makes no sense to speak of an eclipse except from some standpoint that an observer is occupying. Like, the very fact that what does it mean that there was no eclipse in, say, Alaska? There was still a sun and there was still a moon, but they weren't obviously arranged in such a way as to display this thing. And that's sounds kind of like simple, but it actually is, I think, a little profound, that when we speak of an eclipse, we speak of something for us, or that has an effect on us, or the way that the heavens look to us. And a lot of people, there was kind of a meme going around that was like this path of totality, where you can see the eclipse is going to pass over all these towns called Nineveh. And people were sharing this online as like, well, is the rapture coming? And that, at first, everybody was like, well, oh, those dumb evangelical Christians or whatever. And there was some of that, that's a venerable tradition within a certain strain of Christianity. But actually, when you looked at those memes, they weren't all Christians. In fact, Christians, by and large, are a little bit more sanguine about this stuff because, Jesus says nobody knows the hour when the world's going to end, and doomsday prophecies have always been kind of a fringe thing. And besides which, to me at least, it doesn't actually sound like all those descriptions in the end times prophecies are descriptions of eclipses. It's like the sun and the moon shall go dark, but so shall the stars, which is just not like, the Bible is weirdly, I think, kind of precise about which celestial phenomena it wants us to take as miraculous and which are just part of the natural course of things. And so the people that were talking about, oh, the Nineveh towns, and is this part of a larger thing, they actually kind of looked like new age secular TikTok bros and chicks to me. And it fits right in with the Joy Behar of it all, because really, when you get down to it, what's the difference between believing that this totally natural and predictable phenomenon is going to usher in the apocalypse and believing that it's a sign of climate change? They're equally sort of religious, chaotic, unscientific, and superstitious ways of interpreting what is actually a marvelous portent, but not necessarily like an indicator of some sort of miraculous eruption of the divine, except of the normal everyday kind, into our lives. So I thought that was funny, that like there's this weird horseshoe going on between kooks online of this new pagan variety and the quote unquote follow the science crowd, who have their own sort of faith about where all events in nature come from, be it climate change or race inequality or whatever.
Yeah, it sort of came for the eclipse, but really we enjoyed the most the friends we made along the way who shared irrational beliefs of various sorts. The overlapping Venn diagram of secular and religious kooks, which is not to say that various religiously flavored folks who believe in end times or prophecies are kooks. I don't mean to imply that, but yeah. Well, I don't know what else to say about the eclipse. I guess that's it. Yeah, we have to wait, till 2044, I think, for the next one. And it won't cross, I think, Tennessee or Greater Dallas. So Spencer will have to drive to it, I suppose.
I'll have to go down to Alabama. I think there's one in 2045 or something. I can't quite remember. But yes, somewhere on Earth, speaking again to the sort of relationality and relativity of eclipses, somewhere on Earth, a total eclipse happens once about every 18 months. But in the same place, if you stood in the same place, you would have to wait for about 400 years until the.
And there was also the meme of Trump looking at the eclipse with his naked eye, right? I don't understand all this hype. I mean, I remember when I was a kid at school, elementary school, I think we looked at a partial solar eclipse without glasses, and the level of sort of freak out and caution and safetyism around this was something new. I guess it's just a product of social media and everyone warning each other of the dangers of looking at it. But
I think the problem is if you like stare at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Just like if you stared at the sun.
Right.
For however long.
Yeah. Poor Mr. Galileo sacrificed his eyesight for science, staring at the sun. Well, on now to a much more mundane topic, which is the consumer price index. So it was expected. So after January and February were higher than normal, the CPI came in for March and it was higher. These margins are so low. I'm actually a little surprised that it affected the Dow so much, which dropped off 422 points or 1.1% after a couple days of dropping. But it was expected to be 0.3% climb in March and 3.5% annual, and it was instead 0.4% in March and 3.5%. Sorry, it was supposed to be 0.3 and 3.4. It was 0.4 and 3.5. So the Dow fell. I mean, inflation had been in a downward trajectory since 2021 in the summer-ish, and now seems to have started climbing back up, causing, I'm sure, all sorts of consternation in the Biden presidential campaign. They're trying to, we'll get to another one, but they're trying to manage multiple crises and bring them to a conclusion so that they have a better chance of getting reelected. Treasury yields jumped to the highest they've been this year, all of them, the 2, the 10, and the 30 year. So I don't know, what does this portend, if anything? I mean, the mundane thing is, it was Milton Friedman who said inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. That's in some dispute from some of our economist friends because of COVID and supply shocks and the hangover from all of that. But it seems to me pretty obvious why we continue to have inflation. And that is, if you look at the money supply since COVID, since 2020, and this has been the fault of both parties and both presidents in a way, Trump and Biden, we've printed more money in the last 4 years than we have, in the history of the world, or don't quote me on that, but close. So it seems pretty easy to explain to me, but
Right.
What do we make of it?
Well, it is easy to explain, but there's also on top of this, it's like credibility problem. Like it's almost, we're heading into like numbers aren't real territory because the narrative has been weaponized so consistently and in such lockstep by so many parts of the elite socioeconomic and financial apparatus to convince people, oh, it's really not that bad. The numbers aren't really going up. I don't care if your McChicken sandwich costs $3 and just last year it cost $1, whatever it is. It's not real. You don't need those eggs anyway. It's just this unremitting cytokine storm of propaganda designed to massage and manipulate what are supposed to be reliable statistics in order to just get it into people's heads that whatever it is that's going on, it's really not a problem. We're not headed toward the abyss, where the frog is not boiling, whatever, nightmare scenario, whatever metaphor of decline and ruin you prefer, your argument is invalid. And you just need to keep your head down and go along with the ride. Of course, there's always that kind of like twisted version of the patriotic argument, which is, well, yeah, we're kind of in this like weird global Cold War right now again, and we might have a rough patch, and it's best for everyone that we just close ranks and not, check the ticker every day and not fear that the crash is going to come tomorrow, and just focus on executing in our everyday lives, one fiscal quarter at a time. But can you really trust the people who are making that message right now? And I think for a lot of Americans, the answer is no. They do not trust them, and they're not going to trust them, whether the number go up or number go down. So there is inflation. It is, I think, chronically undermeasured, underestimated. And I think a lot of Americans feel this way and are kind of on a knife's edge right now. The election's coming. The war situation is not very good. The economic outlook is weird. Most of the, if not all the job growth seems to have come from the influx of certain people into the country. The average Americans don't like it, and they sense a profound disturbance in the force.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I gather Jerome Powell, the Fed chief, he initially blamed the the first couple years he was in, or Biden was in, he blamed Trump era immigration policies for the slow economy. And I mean, evidently the plan was, once inflation really kicked in, that letting in millions of people would dampen inflation because it would put all this negative wage pressure. Now, this is what, the classical left and, just anyone who cares about basic economics should understand, which is that, if labor is a commodity, so there's supply and demand. And if you have more of it, then the price will go down. That's why, like, Cesar Chavez of the United Fruit Workers sent his people down to block the border because they didn't want scabs coming in to depress wages. Well, I mean, I guess Jerome Powell thought that this is a great idea. This way we'll keep inflation in check and we'll grow the economy with all of this cheap labor. But then there's this other funny wrinkle, which is, well, you have all these people coming in. They also have to buy stuff. They're also consumers. They also need places to live. So, I mean, presumably they're also competing for, housing and, food. I don't know to what extent that demand has led to more inflation, but in any event, it's not working because inflation is way up. For all the things, okay, yes, core inflation, however they like to figure these things out, they can, say, oh, well, if you take out gas and food, it's actually not so bad.
Yeah.
That's what people spend their money on. Like, car insurance is way up, food is way up. I don't think there's any way you can play this game that, like, I still remember when Biden said, well, if cereal's too expensive, buy the other Raisin Bran, save $1. It's like, what a let them eat cake remark. I mean, it's kind of grotesque. I saw a thing like some kind of ad in New York a year or two ago talking about how, oh, you can make a nice soup out of, like, onions and carrots or something.
Stones and toenails.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean,
it is too much, right? Like, and the thing that they'll argue, like, oh, inflation's not that bad as long as you don't need to eat or breathe or drive a car or live in a house. That part is so galling, and it makes me think that these two topics are actually weirdly related that we've talked about so far. Like, you want to know why people think outer space is fake? It's because for, all of our collective adult lives, we've been confronted with these numbers that are supposed to represent some hard and fast economic reality. Like, here's GDP, here's inflation rates, here's whatever. And then the minute one of them looks bad for a Democrat, it's like, oh, it's like not actually, just kidding. Like, it's sort of fake. And if you adjust it around, and then you go out into the world and it's like, okay, but, paycheck number stay same and basic food number go up. So how is this not a problem for me? And so, yeah, I think obviously during COVID, the science was this political football, and suddenly it turned out, whoops, like Protestant Reformation, absolute standard of truth kind of slipping out from underneath us in just the same way that, like, the Catholic Church did. And, we thought that we could just create this empirical standard for everybody and we would all at least agree on physical material realities. Well, unfortunately, like, politics go brr, and now it turns out that too is contested. And so, you want to know why the world is being re-enchanted, why people are starting to feel as if actually, like, it's not just a game of objects moving through space. Part of it is because, like, we really are realizing the extent to which neutrality is fake. And all of the, bespectacled bow tie wearing authorities that were constantly coming on TV to tell us, like, this is CNN, this is your like definitive account of what life is and how politics should work, and this is the neutral stuff that we can all agree on, and then we can argue within those parameters. Like, all of that turns out to be kind of a hoax. And so, whereas it's not actually the case that, I don't personally think space is fake exactly. I think it's probably quite different than what most people imagine. But like, there are some things that we can know about the world around us and our surroundings, but they're much closer to the sort of like left side of the bell curve take on things. Like, I'm not making all that much money. You're importing a bunch of foreign labor, and also everything's getting more expensive. Like, that is closer to the sort of empirical standard of reality than the so-called authorities, who are now basically just engaging in this elaborate puppet show, putting on one of those hats from like the Fantasia scene with Mickey Mouse, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and waving their hands around. Like, I mean, that's clown world, and that's what makes people feel like everything is kind of made up or is some form of shadow play, is the like insistence that what's going on around you isn't going on.
Yeah, we talked about excluding expensive stuff. So, I mean, this CPI number is always goosed downward, inevitably. Housing and fuel are excluded from this CPI calculation I just quoted. And the main drivers of this rise, so saith, analysts, were meat and poultry. So I've got to think that, this in some small or maybe medium-sized way, this is causing some consternation in the Biden campaign and maybe some rejoicing in the Trump campaign, especially if present trends continue. I mean, I couldn't think of a worse. I mean, this is part of what's been driving the continuing frustration of the Biden campaign and various surrogates when they're asked about this sort of thing. Biden was asked the other day about this question of rising prices before these numbers dropped, and his response is just to basically say, at least the sub rosa or implication is, what's wrong with you people? We have the greatest economy we've had in a long time, job growth, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't you just shut up about this? Meanwhile, as you indicated, Spencer, normal people every week, realize that it's really hard to get out of the grocery store for less than $100. And that's when you buy 7 items, let alone a whole week's worth of stuff. So for those that wish Biden to be defeated, we certainly all count ourselves in that camp, this seems like a positive development, although we should say that it's not positive in general, because our fellow Americans continue to hurt.
And as James pointed out, like there has been job growth and unemployment is low, but most of the job growth has been among non-voters, like non-citizens. Like, that's who's taken all these jobs. So, in fact, the foreigners are taking our gerbs.
Yeah,
it's true.
It do really be like, it do be like that sometimes.
So it seems.
Come on, guys. Yeah. They're not taking our jobs, and it's good that they are.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Right. I mean, classic celebration parallax. And the other thing that they do, which I like, sorry to harp on this, but this really does like grind my gears or toast my peanuts or whatever you want to say, is they'll be like, Biden has added so many jobs, and there have been just like, we've really cut back on inflation, or we've really cured the supply chain crisis. And you look at it and it's like, yeah, since COVID, when quote unquote, the pandemic caused the economy to shut down, which is already yet another layer of euphemism for we caused the economy to shut down. Like, Biden and his buddies were like, oh, this disease, once in a lifetime disease, is the perfect opportunity to basically do a controlled economy, and just totally stamped their foot onto the neck of every small business owner in sight. And before Biden, it was Gavin Newsom. And I mean, they will now, of course, laughably tell you that it was somehow like Trump and Ron DeSantis, but it wasn't. It was Democrats very expressly adopted a policy during COVID that the way to cure the virus was to become poor for some reason. And now they're like, look how rich we made you. It's like, no, you fixed the problem that you caused. Like, you don't get any credit for that. And a lot of the numbers that they were celebrating, even when things looked ostensibly better than they do now were basically just comebacks from their own like stupid COVID policy.
Do you guys think that Biden is really going to be the nominee? I mean, I'm just, you know what you know what it reminds me of? It's like everyone being afraid to take grandpa's car keys away. And like what is going on here? Like, is it really just the case that, well, he and Jill wanted to stay in office, so this entire like mega $1 trillion machine couldn't do anything about it?
Well, number one, Seth, it's Dr. Jill. Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Dr. Jill. Number two, I think they're sort of stuck with Biden, even if it, one does not simply like unseat a president and put someone else in his place. They could do it if they really felt compelled, but who's going to step in? It's going to be a food fight if for whatever reason he did sort of succumb or tap out or abdicate. It would be Mayor Pete versus Kamala. I mean, it would be a mess. And Biden does kind of occupy this weird sweet spot for the Dems, where he's not out there trying to convince us that Hamas are really the good guys, but he's also going to try to get Benjamin Netanyahu to kind of cool his jets or whatever. He is going to keep sending magic money to Ukraine, but he's also the guy who, got us out of Afghanistan. And he is like apparently a Catholic president, but not too Catholic. And so he's kind of just, sort of the guy who manages to strike these weird balances that the Democrats need in order to limp through this weird moment. And, so I think he's definitely the guy for November. But the big question is he the guy in January? And I think the doubt hanging over a lot of people on the right and the left about whether the guy, the Joe Biden of January 2025, is going to be able to sustain for, 4 more years. Like, who can say what world we are going to be living in 4 years? Whatever world it is, it seems like Joe Biden probably is not the man for that particular moment.
Yeah, there's just no real mechanism to remove him. They'd have to blackmail him somehow to force him out if he doesn't want to go. Which
he can't even like read his own. He can't like decide who he's going to call on. He can't. Would it be that difficult to like kind of put the squeeze on? I don't know. I mean, maybe
it's getting awfully late.
Yeah.
To do that, to just step in, then it really does start to look like an admission of helplessness. We just didn't know what to do, so we kind of at the last minute yanked him out, brought out the old hook and cane and yanked him out. And under the conditions that James describes, 4 more years starts to sound like this kind of weary plodding, like 4 more years, which on the one hand accurately reflects the sentiment, I suspect, of many people that we're just kind of trudging along until whatever, some total eclipse of the sun blots us all out and plunges us into eternal darkness. And also, like, who else, how are they gonna really turn this ship around?
It's weird. Doesn't it seem like, okay, like Biden had his big $25 million fundraiser last week or 2 weeks ago, but then Trump turned around and raised $50 million at Mar-a-Lago. And it sounds like there's all of these like mega billionaires who are lining up to support Trump, which wasn't really the case 8 years ago. It's kind of weird. Like, it seems like, I don't know. It doesn't seem, it kind of feels like at the same time that Trump is now like the most persona non grata among certain circles, like people who don't buy it appear to be completely embracing him, no?
Well, it definitely seems as if for those that believe Trump is, a persecuted martyr of the deep state, nothing now can diminish their love and affection or one iota. And every attempt to do so has the opposite effect. So I definitely think you're right that passions now run higher for Trump among a higher percentage of his supporters than they did in 2016. The question is, what are the absolute numbers of those supporters? And I have no idea. But yes, it certainly seems like now for a certain caste of voter, Trump support has now reached or is reaching a kind of crescendo to a climax of truly just Wagnerian proportions, and the Trump love is magnifying accordingly, which cannot be said of Biden support. There's a lot of begrudging Biden support and a lot of enthusiastic Trump support.
Yeah, speaking of Trump love, he was in Atlanta at a Chick-fil-A. There's this video online, and a local black resident enthusiastically said, "I don't care what the media tells you, Mr. Trump, we support you." And then he calls her up and gives her a hug. I want to raise, and just for us to talk about a bit, I mean, this is one way in which 2024 will be very unlike 2020. Biden basement campaign can't happen again. Trump is going to be out and about in his element. I mean, does this bode for a big change for the Trump Biden 2.0?
I thought it was interesting that Trump hugged that woman, because he very rarely traditionally he didn't like to touch people, right? That's what they would say, that he's a germaphobe of some sort. I've never really seen him give like big hugs to strangers. Maybe he's really, I don't know, changed. But yeah, I mean, Biden can't just run a basement campaign anymore. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens if he's like, trying to do rallies or press the flesh. I mean, that doesn't really go very well. I mean, even the other day, he was repeating his line about having been the first person to go to college in his family, which is just utter nonsense. I mean, I believe his great grandfather went to college. Now, can you imagine, as someone who was born in 1942, for his great grandfather to have gone I mean, there's probably very few people for whom that's the case.
He was taught by like John Winthrop or something.
Yeah, right. But like, he just keeps saying this.
A classmate of Jimmy Madison.
Yeah,
right.
He's still in this world, this mental world where you can't really fact check him, because nobody's paying attention, nobody's listening, there's no computers, there's no way to look it up. There's no, constant flow of backflow of information. It just seems like a total disaster, but I mean, one that I'll like to see. But
just a small note to what Seth was saying, which is that weirdly, he and Trump in different ways kind of share the quality of having realized that you can just say and everybody thinks there are going to be consequences, but there actually aren't. Like Trump does it in the like, he says the supposedly unsayable offensive thing, but Biden just says it in lies. Like, when I was a teenager, my grandfather loved gay men kissing. Like, sure, why not, Grandpa?
That's a tough act to follow, but I will do my best. It is interesting. The identity of Donald J. Trump current year probably deserves a podcast all of its own, because there have been changes, and some of them are more intriguing than others. Perhaps he has embraced or begun to embrace the post-Enlightenment re-enchantment of the world, and is embracing medieval miasma theory of illness, and is abandoning the germ theory of illness. We will see. But I'm joking in a sense, but in another sense, like, there is this weirdness surrounding Trump and the COVID vaccines, and a thing to watch over the course of this campaign, insofar as it is a real campaign, is how Trump manages the legacy of his presidency under COVID. It's a lot of voters seem to not really want to revisit that time. That, I think, is a major factor in why DeSantis ran into trouble on the campaign trail. And a Trump that is more handsy in a non-threatening way is probably a Trump that is going to strike a more favorable contrast with Joe Biden, who is handsy in a threatening way to the point of humor, but also, whether it's P. Diddy or Jeffrey Epstein or a growing list of characters, it's a bad look whether you're on the right or the left.
To circle back to my first comment at the beginning of this little segment, another reason that I think the Biden administration will have some consternation, especially as they start to plan, I'm sure they already have their convention for the summer, is this question of Israel and Gaza, which I want to just end the podcast talking a bit about this. So after the accidental killing of World Central Kitchen workers in a misdirected missile strike, I think, or bomb strike, I forget which, in Gaza, there's much ado made about Jake Sullivan and Biden and the team on the phone with Bibi Netanyahu and talking about how Gaza needed a ceasefire. And the change that has been reported was that there was no initial link between a ceasefire and hostage releases. So this was made into a big thing because it's sort of a first for the Biden administration, that is to pressure significantly the Netanyahu administration or the coalition government in Israel over this question. And even Chris Coons, the senator from Delaware, who's part of the sort of Israel hawk portion of the Democratic Party, is now entertaining that aid might be conditioned on the conduct of the war in Gaza. I mean, you could have, for my sins, I listened to David Axelrod on Bill Kristol's podcast, and Axelrod was, the convention is going to be in Chicago, so there could be all sorts of shades of 68, whether it's migrant tents with the Texas buses flooding migrants up to Chicago and causing great consternation in the political community up there, or this continued rift in the Democratic Party between the sort of young left-wing portion of the party who thinks this is all genocide and the Palestinians are angels, versus the older guard, frankly, Biden side of the party, which has been kind of reflexively pro-Israel for a variety of reasons for a long time. You could see this confluence of events could make the convention in Chicago a real black eye for the Democrats. So naturally, they want to wrap this whole Gaza war up quickly, or the war, I should say, in general against Hamas. What do you guys think?
I think it's interesting. Well, I mean, kind of on a broader scale, this is the first time in my lifetime, in any of our lifetimes, that a Democrat president has faced significant opposition over foreign policy. Democrat presidents always get a pass on this. Clinton, don't forget, Clinton's Iraq sanctions regime killed 500,000 Iraqi children. And when they asked Madeleine Albright about it, she said, on 60 Minutes, she said, I think the cost is worth it. Now, the hard left made like the Answer Coalition people made a big deal out of it, but nobody else did. Nobody cared when he bombed Belgrade. Of course, once Bush came in and then, when he was going to invade Iraq, it was a huge deal. But Obama didn't face any problems. Not since Lyndon Johnson has a Democrat president faced any pushback on foreign policy. This is the first time. I think like the Free Palestine people, the extent to which it's kind of a cult and the extent to which they really hate Israel. The left has always had this thing, progressive, but except Palestine. And like they throw that around, complaining about people like Richie Torres in the Bronx, like these lefty politicians who are nevertheless pro-Israel. So, that's always gotten under their skin. They really don't like it. So this has been like this weird explosion of all of this repressed rage that they have. So yeah, I think it's going to be ugly, but this has been brewing for a long time, this split. Look, the Democrats get 50% of their donations from Jewish donors, at least their large donations. But at the same time, they have this, this is the whole coalition of the fringes thing. They've got this, rabidly anti-Zionist, pro-decolonization faction that they have to deal with. So, yeah, I think it's going to be, even if Israel ends its war completely by August, I don't think I think it's going to be a real mess for the Dems. For the Republican, like, let me just say, I know I'm going on. Like, last week, I went to the New York State GOP annual dinner, and it's funny because there was a lot of reference to Israel and to all of that, and like, it was just interesting being in New York and like having people, talk about it, and there being it didn't really seem like people were kind of like rolling their eyes, or that there was a worry that somebody would start screaming about it. I mean, the Republicans don't really have this issue. Yes, okay, there are some, Nick Fuentes types, or these people on the hard right who are just like, fixated on Israel. It's like their hobby horse, how, the Zionists are leading us around by the nose. But for the most part, the people on the right are okay with the whole thing. So we're not going to have the same conflict at our convention. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, our sort of internal struggles are on this issue seem to me to be of a different kind, and of the kind that takes place on Twitter, which I don't think that Twitter's not real life, or that Twitter is totally unrelated to real life, but it's not the same thing. You're right, Seth, as what the Democrat Party as an official organ is going through. And there's sort of it seems like there's this bill that's come due finally that you court these extremists and these, Paulo Freire types and these, like, the coalition of the dispossessed or whatever. And then eventually they ask you to put up or shut up. And it turns out that they basically think from the river to the sea. Like, look, this thing that happened with aid workers in the war is horrifying. It's one of the things in the war that has really driven home just how grotesque and dreadful the situation is over there. And so there would be, I think, and I think is actually on the right, some pretty serious discussion about, and range of views about how Israel is prosecuting this war. I still tend to think it's a consequence of the way that Hamas does battle, which is by using human shields. But, again, you could have that conversation. What doesn't seem to me to be true is that there exists some mode of prosecuting this war, some higher ground to which Israel could retreat morally that would cause these criticisms to go away. In other words, things like this catastrophe with the aid workers strike me as almost entirely pretextual. And Seth, I agree that they're causing a flare-up in the Democrat Party, but they're not the source of that flare-up. They're really just prompting kind of a new stage of an American problem within the Democrat Party that is going to continue to cause them real, like, chaos, which I suppose is good for us in some sense. But I have to say, it doesn't make me feel all that excited, just because it represents just the most obscene and disgusting, like, wing of the Democrats having this real rhetorical power. And in just the same way as when the, like, groypers scuttle out of the shadows and, like, slaver and scream slurs, I find myself a little bit put off, whether or not it's good or bad, or going to cause, strategically good or bad, or going to cause problems or whatever. It just, like, it doesn't make me feel good.
Any closing thoughts, James?
I mean, I think, Gaza is a sticky wicket. There's a reason why this conflict is so difficult to reach a quick resolution to. Look, I think the elephant in the room is China, and I think so much of what's going on in the quote unquote region, so much what's going on with Israel, and so much what's going on with Ukraine has to do with the fact that China is doing an effective job of creating a full spectrum geopolitical alternative to American dominance and the American system, such as it is today. The Arabs don't really want to get folded into that. Israel has a decent working relationship with China. Russia obviously made its choice. I don't think it was as easy of a choice as many present. There are some real costs to becoming close partners with the Chinese, but it's a time for choosing. And it's going to be an uncomfortable choice for a number of different players. I think Americans have agreed in a bipartisan way for decades that the American, empire, informal empire, has been too active and too costly and overextended in the world. But one of the toughest military maneuvers is a fighting retreat, and it's very difficult to coalesce America's overextended footprint to a better shape and size without things spiraling out of control. And we're seeing that in what's happening with Israel. We're seeing that in what's happening with Ukraine. And I don't think it's going to get any tidier or quieter in the short term. I think it's all going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, hard to disagree with that. Well, with that, I think we will wrap it up for today. Thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to support our work, go to claremont.org/donate. Please rate and review the show. 5 stars only. Help spread the word. Thank you to our engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri. You can find all the latest Claremont Review book stuff at ClaremontReviewBooks.com. Our latest work in DC and around the states on policy combating wokeness, identity politics, questions of citizenship and immigration, and all the rest at dc.claremont.org. And well, I guess I have sort of a hard out, so we got to skip read the damn site. So my apologies to the listeners. We're ending about 4 minutes early. We will maybe give you a double dose next week. Thank you all. Talk to you next week.